Hi folks, and welcome to the next episode of It's a Fair Question. You know, we're going to deal with some quite difficult subjects as part of this series, and today's certainly comes into that category. We're going to think about addiction, might I say the hell of addiction, but we're also going to speak about the way out and the hope that there is for lives to be transformed. So without further introduction, let's get started. Today's episode, It's a Fair Question. So let me introduce my two guests for today. I've got Andy and I've got Fraser, and I am delighted, really glad that you two guys were willing to come and speak to me today as part of the series that we're doing, It's a Fair Question. So we've got some pretty tough subject matter today, and I don't want to beat about the bush with too much small talk, and we just want to get right into it. Both of you, and you're perfectly upfront about this, both of you have battled through addiction problems, and you're out the other side, and we're going to rejoice in that. But before we get there, maybe thinking about the downward spiral first of all, I'm going to guess that neither of you woke up one morning and kind of decided, you know what, I'm going to become an addict. So if that was not the case, then I wonder if you would describe for us how you got into that place. As you look back, what was it that was going on there that took you down into the pit of addiction? Andy, I wonder if you might kick off. Tell us a bit about yourself and how that happened in your life.
Hiya, Martin. I think that when I'm speaking about my past and, I'm sharing, that is one of the things that I say to people is, if you ask a 6-year-old kid, what do they want to be when they're older? They're not going to tell you that they want to be a drug addict, or they want to be in prison, or, they want to be in care, So, of course not. I think for me, growing up as a child was generally okay. I think things for me really started to kind of take a turn. My dad died at a very young age. I was 12. And I went from being like, a very normal, placid little boy, and I suddenly became like an angry teenager. Looking back now, I started to look for, I guess, what it was, acceptance, in all the wrong areas. My dad, he died when I was 12. I guess looking back now, I felt really rejected, abandoned, and I began to look for that in all the wrong areas, like I say, and I began to hang about with older members of my community in Glasgow. And of course, a lot of wrong things, began when that happened. They weren't really the best of role models, I began to start to smoke, cannabis at the age of 12. I mean, that gradually led to, more stronger things, party drugs, ecstasy, LSD, drinking a lot at the weekends. And of course, to fund that, I began to get into a lot of crime. Growing up in Glasgow, as you can imagine back then, there was a lot of gang culture. We would, go shoplifting. We would, break into cars. We would get involved in, a lot of wrong things.
Yeah.
And a lot of that was to kind of fund, it wasn't an addiction at the time, but it was, I guess, pleasures. And on a backlash of that was, my dad not being around, my mum, single mum of 4 kids. She couldn't cope. I was in and out of police stations. She was coming to pick me up, 2-3 times a week. And it began to the point where I ended up in the care system, and just to keep it kind of a brief from the care system, I ended up in the prison system. And I guess at the age of 15, I first tried heroin. like I say, a lot of older guys were doing it round about me. And I guess at the time it was to be a part of something, to feel accepted, completely and utterly naive to the destruction it could actually bring in my life. And I tried it then, and I left it, you know. But going back later on in my teenage years as such in prison, I began to dabble with it again, to the point where I ended up addicted, you know, completely and utterly lost control. I spent 4 years then in Arbroath, just lost in addiction, you know, just completely, you know, battling, you know, just to a point where I became absolutely broken.
Fraser, let me introduce you. Same with Andy. Thanks very much for being willing to come and share today. Maybe just tell us a wee bit of your background, the same kind of question. How did you end up where you ended up, which was right down there? You know, how did that all come about for you?
Yeah, I mean, very much like Andy. Yeah, it was a death in my family. I grew up in Arbroath with a very, very loving family, great family. They provided for me, they'd done everything for me. I was kind of spoiled as a kid, as some people would say. You know, there was a very close family. When I got to the age of 14, my older brother Craig was killed in a motorbike accident. You know, and that shook the whole family up. And no one knew how to deal with that. You know, the family didn't know how to deal with that. I didn't know how to deal with that. And I kind of ran. I ran away from the family, although they were still there for me. They were grieving in their own way. I was grieving in a different way. And I kind of ran, in a sense, in my mind. And like Andy said, got involved with some people that was older than me. Got involved with a couple who were selling heroin. At the age of 14, I had my first injection of heroin. And from there, it was pretty much a downward spiral. At the age of 15, I ended up on a methadone prescription. The woman who I was buying heroin off who actually took me to the doctor, said that they were my guardian, and she was concerned for me. They showed the doctor my arms, and there and then I was prescribed a methadone and diazepam prescription at the age of 15.
Fraser, just to clarify, just say that again, age 15. By 15, you were on a methadone script?
Yes, that's right, yeah. 60 mils I was prescribed there and then. I walked out of the doctor's with on that day. Because there wasn't any of the drug services that there is now in them days, you know, so it was a prescription from a doctor, and that was as far as it went, kind of thing. But yeah, my life kind of spiraled out of control from there. I left school very young. When I left school, I left kind of on good terms. I went to do a work placement with a local joinery company, and for a year, I'd done okay in that. I ended up getting an apprenticeship out of it. But over the following few years, 15, 16, 17, and when I started my apprenticeship, you know, the methadone, the addiction started taking its toll. It started showing on my outer appearance and my actions, and I lost my apprenticeship. I was kicked out of college for selling drugs. So I lost all my apprenticeship at the age of 17. At that point, my parents kind of found out about the addiction. I told them about the methadone, and coming from a background of a loving family, there was no drugs in the family, no alcohol in the family. It wasn't a background like that, so they didn't really know where the drugs were going. They just knew where I was at. And my mum's way of dealing with that was to get me a one-way ticket out of Arbroath. But because it came off the methadone and it came off the diazepam, I kind of thought, well, I'll beat this addiction thing, you know. And after a little while, I decided to go back to Arbroath. Within the space of, I would say, 2 to 3 weeks, I was back with the same people doing the same things. I was injecting all over my body. And I think I went to, this time I think addiction took me to a very, very deeper place than it was when in the methadone days. you know, I met a woman, and she had my two beautiful twins, Robbie and Chloe. They're actually 19 now. When they were two, our relationship with my ex-partner was a bit rocky at the time due to the drugs, and I more or less chose the drugs over my kids. I left the family home, and then that was me. I wasn't present for the next 14 years of their life. Up until about the age of 38, where I was running the streets of Arbroath. I was down and out. I was in and out of bed sits, couldn't hold down a job, couldn't hold down a flat, sleeping on people's settees. I was injecting all over my body. I had infection after infection, overdose after overdose. You know, the addiction just ravished me, basically. I'd lost my family, and I had nowhere to turn for that point. Like.
Okay. Again, thank you for sharing so openly, and you know, the way you're putting it there, you really got rock bottom. You know, by the sound of it, and I guess when there's, you know, when you're at rock bottom, there's nowhere else to go lower. Other than that, you know, you could have ended up in a grave, and you know, many of the folks that you've known through the years, probably that's how things ended up. Let me ask you this question. I'll put it to both of you. There must have been times in all of that when you thought, oh, I've got to stop this. I've got to stop this. So maybe like Monday morning, that's it. No more drugs. And I mean, can you relate to that? Was there attempts to stop it, attempts to get out of it, or maybe thinking, if I really try hard this time, and just my willpower can help me to stop taking drugs? Andy, how do you relate to that?
Massively. Like I say, you know, we spoke about at the beginning, you know, when you ask a kid what they want to be when they're older, nobody will say they want to be in addiction. And that was, you know, very true for me in my life, actually. I became a man that I despised, you know. You know, there were many times that I woke up in the morning and I was just sick of the man that I became. You know, I had tried many times, you know, cold turkey, you know, completely withdrawn, you know, for weeks at a time. You know, there had been even times where, you know, obviously I spoke about getting involved in crime. Well, that's part of addiction, that at points that I'd asked to be sent to prison just so that I could get clean, because I was so desperate. You know, I tried again, you know, different rehabs. You know, I kind of tried it all, many attempts of, you know, trying to really get clean within the time that I was in addiction.
Yeah. Okay. So really what you're describing is the power of the addiction, the hold it had over you, that, you know, if you could have shaken it off, you would have done it, if it was as simple as that. Yeah.
Of course. I think, you know, with heroin addiction, you know, at first it starts off where you're, you know, it's making you feel good, you know, but when you're in heroin addiction, it comes to a point where you physically, you know, need to have, you know, a fix to kind of a function in what you thought was normal. You know. Yeah.
Fraser, I mean, I guess you'll say something similar, but let me ask you anyway. This business of trying to free yourself of it, you must have had a few goes through the years.
Oh yeah, a lot. Every weekend when I ran out of money, I tried. But yeah, I mean, Andy said there he despised the man he became, and you know, I think for me, my identity had came into that addict. That addict was my identity. Everywhere I went, every thought that I have, every person I was involved with, it was related to drugs. You know, so even if I was trying to get clean, or if I decided one day, okay, I'm going to try and stop, there would always be someone would turn up at my door, or I would go and find someone, or I would be involved somehow where it would just happen to be there, you know. And I mean, I used my flat for a long time, where I would let dealers come to my flat and deal from my flat, and in that way that paid for my drugs. So I wasn't in a position there where I had to go and steal or go and rob anything. I was getting it fed to me basically. And
Right.
other times if I was sleeping on people's settees, I would stay at a dealer's house, and then I would do the running for them. So they would give me the drugs again for free. I mean, I was given a lot of opportunity to help myself that I probably never done, looking back on it now.
Okay. Now, I want to pick up on something you said there a wee minute ago. You said your whole identity was wrapped up in your addiction. Now, let's fast forward, because the guy that sat here before us today, Fraser today, your identity is entirely different to that.
Okay.
So you're now found in Christ. Your identity is now in Jesus. So tell us a bit about that, and in what sense you look to Jesus as being the answer and the one that led you to freedom from addiction. Speak a wee bit about that, Fraser, if you would.
Okay, so coming up to the point of going into rehab, I was injecting in my groin. I got a massive infection in my groin where it ended up to me losing my hip. So in hospital, a surgeon had told me, "Look, Fraser, there's a very good chance that we're going to have to amputate your leg." At that point, I had a massive fright. I was scared. And I remember in the hospital, I lay there and I looked up at the ceiling and I said, "God, if you're real, I need help here, man. Please let me keep my leg. I want to walk again." And I ended up, I got my hip removed. I was put on 300 mils of morphine a day and released from the hospital, but I still had my leg. So through that, I knew that God was real. 9 months later, after going to a drop-in centre where Christians were, they helped me a lot. Havilah and Arbroath, it was called, and they guided me through a lot of hard times there. But 9 months later, I got a new hip put in, and from that point, I got an opportunity to leave Scotland and go into a Christian hostel. So when I went in there, I went on what I called at that time the 3-day rule. And I used to say, well, if Jesus can overcome death in 3 days, then I can overcome my withdrawals in 3 days. So I would reduce on the morphine, and for a couple of days I would feel pretty ropey and rough. On the third day I would get up and I'd feel better again. And I continued that all the way. I would reduce. I felt rough for a couple of days. Third day I got up, I would feel better again. I'd done that all the way right down to my very last tablet. I took the last tablet in a couple of days. I felt rough, and I got up on the third day, and it did not work. It did not work. I was in agony. My stomach was in knots. My legs were sore. I felt so sick. I was walking around the rehab, having a bit of a pity party, really. I was walking about, and someone came up to me, one of the staff members, and says, "Look, Fraser, the same way that Jesus has set you free from your sin, he set you free from your medication." And I kind of looked at the guy and I thought, "Yeah, well, that's all right for you to say, innit? It's not you, it's rattling here." And I was angry with him in a sense, And but anyway, I went up to my bed that night. I got my Bible out and I was reading through my Bible, and Galatians 5:1 came out, and it says, "It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm then, and do not be burdened again by a yoke of slavery." And that something changed inside me at that point. Just something snapped. I can only describe it as a light going on, a bomb exploding, something inside me. But all of a sudden, it was free. It was free. And I remember I ran downstairs the next day in the rehab. I kicked the door open, and I was like, guys. I was like, "Look, we're in a rehab. We've got 4 walls all around us, but I'm free. And it's been from that day forward, I've had no desire to smoke a cigarette. I've had no desire to have a drink. And I've had no desire to touch a drug. And I had this realization that Fraser, the addict that came into rehab, wasn't the Fraser that was going out. I was going out there with Christ now, with a new identity, with his spirit in me. And from there, my new identity was born.
Amen.
So, which is great to hear. The new creation, the old was gone, the new had come. So just for folks' interest, how long have you been free now from your addiction, Fraser?
It was 4 years on the 6th of June. I walked through the rehab doors. 4
Yes,
years.
just a little over 4 years. Well, it's wonderful, and we rejoice in that to see you free and living life to the full today. Andy, how much for you was your faith in Jesus important or crucial in terms of you getting free from addiction?
Well, picking up from where I left off earlier, Martin, I was, lost in a very broken place. I was connected to the Havilah project, which is part of the Church of Scotland in Arbroath, and there was a faithful team of volunteers. And I remember that I was just in this place where I was 9 stone wet through. Again, just completely broken, lost, and I would have done anything to just get free from my addiction. And I remember I was walking past the church, and as I was walking past the church, I saw Tracy, who is one of the volunteers at the Havilah project, and I pleaded with her, I will do anything to help me. I am sick of this lifestyle, and so Tracy mentioned this, this ministry, this rehab to me, and a week later, I made the call. A week later, I was there in Birmingham, in Bethel of Birmingham, and there, a Christian facility. Heard a lot about this man Jesus, how this man could, set me free from my addiction and everything else that had came with it, and I tried, to kind of look for this man Jesus. I would read my Bible, I would attend church services, and I guess for me, I wasn't really at that time doing it with a whole heart, so I stayed in this ministry, this rehab, for 9 months. And after 9 months, I'd put some weight on. I was looking healthy, and I thought, you know what, I'm good. I've not took any drugs for 9 months. I'm looking good. I've got some nice new clothes. I'll be all right. I'm going to go back to Arbroath. I'm going to get a job. I'm going to get a girlfriend, and I'm going to get a flat, and I'm going to live happily ever after. And I went back to Arbroath, and I had somewhere, safe to stay. I got a job, but I quickly found that I began to make the same choices again. I started to go out at the weekends, and that led to different things, and just to really cut a long story short for you, I started using heroin again. And I remember that I'd been drinking lots, and I injected, a substantial amount of heroin, and I overdosed, and I died, in a flat in Arbroath. Thankfully, by the grace of God, the flat where I was, they had a naltrexone kit, which is used to bring somebody that's overdosed, to bring them back. So I had that injected into me twice, and thankfully, I came back again. And that was a wake-up call for me, I knew that I had to make a decision for my life, or I was going to end up dead or in prison. And I went back to the church for the first time since leaving Bethel, and I think it was Mother's Day, 2014. And I can remember being in the congregation in the church in Arbroath, and we sang Amazing Grace. My chains are gone, I've been set free. Mm-hmm. And I felt so convicted. A conviction came over me that I knew that I was bound by addiction, that I was in no way, shape or form free. And that evening I made a decision to go back to Bethel of Britain. I phoned the supervisor there, and he says, come back the next day, much to my surprise. And I went back there. And the point that I'm making is, the first time that I went to Bethel, I was physically broken. I felt like if I just get some weight on, like I mentioned, and I get my health back, that actually I'll be okay. But the second time I went back there broken within, knowing actually that I needed saving, and I made the decision after that to go back to Beter and get baptized and give my life wholeheartedly to serve Jesus.
Okay. Well, thanks for sharing, because what you've described was very dramatically when literally, physically, you were brought back to life from being that close to losing it. But what you've described much more powerfully, I suppose, is coming back to life in all its fullness, faith in Christ, where you are now. So thank you so much for sharing. I'm sure folks who will view this will want to wish you all the best and will hold you in their prayers as we go forward. So Andy, Fraser, thank you so much for sharing, and It's a Fair Question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin.
Thank you, Martin.
Okay, bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Bye.